All right, so we have to talk about the US dollar collapsing and not being the world reserve currency anymore. I mean, you have China and the Saudis moving away from the dollar, and China and Brazil basically saying, we're never going to do business with the dollar again. We're just going to use our own currencies with each other. And there's a whole host of other companies creating new reserve currencies and all sorts of other deals and pacts. So the question is, are all the dominoes finally lining up for the US dollar to collapse and not be the world reserve currency anymore? And more importantly, is this the start of the collapse of the US dollar? Nothing lasts forever, guys. We all know that. We know the dollar is going to be replaced one day, and it looks like the dominoes are finally starting to fall. So let's explore that today. And I just ask in exchange for you to gently tap that like button and consider subscribing too. It's super easy to do if you like the truth without the hype. And YouTube still says that like 65% of you guys that watch my videos regularly aren't subscribed. So make sure you subscribe and turn on that little bell down there. All right, so this has been a hot topic all over my Discord. It was absolutely a hot topic on the Q&A on Sunday. And I actually released a video to my group too to kind of address this entire scenario because it's just being talked about everywhere and it's definitely got a lot of people concerned. So we needed to address it. Link down in the description, by the way, if you want access to that group there. I may have forgotten to take the sale off, but hey, I don't know, check it out and see. But we discussed the China and Saudi deal, the China and Brazil deal. We discussed the EU, we discussed Japan, we discussed all sorts of scenarios and all sorts of various topics within this topic right here to actually dive a little bit deeper and see what are the repercussions of all this, how large of a deal is it actually, what kind of the reasons for it, the reasons against it, and everything else there and kind of put together a complete picture. So I figured I would share the highlights with you guys here so that way you can kind of hear that information as well, because if it's a hot topic in there, I know it's something weighing on you guys' minds out here. So I wanted to make sure I got some information out to you guys as well so that way you had it too. Well, what's going on out there, guys? And hopefully everybody's having an awesome day. So I wanted to talk about, basically the US dollar going away, being replaced, whatever the heck the noise is and such. And so that way we can kind of have a deeper understanding of what the reality is, what's real, what's not. And kind of a lot of the noise around it and such. And I understand that's just part of the cycle. And a lot of folks, Forex and currency in general is very complex, very hard to understand. There's not a lot of good data out there on it and such. And it's a very, very complex thing to understand. It doesn't make any sense to, when you're trying to break it down without getting into a 3-hour lesson on not just economics, but the way money works, money velocity, a lot of other factors like that kind of come into this and such. So it's a very, very complex topic, but you guys know me. I'm just going to basically break it down to its base level and kind of give you guys why I'm not worried about any of the sort of stuff that's going on out there. And the first reason why is it's simply saber rattling from the Saudis and from China to get the U.S. to concede on something or political gamesmanship or whatever the heck you want to call it. This is nothing new. There's been 25 dominoes that are supposedly the first in the many of they're going to create the collapse of the U.S. dollar. Over the course of 20 years, all 25 of those have not been that first domino or more. It's just kind of one of those deals that it makes for a narrative. It makes for a news story. I agree. It will eventually happen. Of course, every great dynasty eventually falls. Currency essentially flips for one reason or another, but there's no reason right now for that to happen. And more importantly, over the past 20 years, the US and the world has actually gone the opposite direction from all the folks, 20 years ago saying the dollar is going to collapse. If anything, the US has their hooks more into everyone than ever before. That's what happens during crisis times. During crisis times, the strong country that is able to kind of uphold everyone and create, a safety net for everyone, which was the US, you can essentially get them even more embedded in your currency and more dependent upon you. And that's exactly what happened, after, 9/11 and the terrorist attacks there and such. Basically, the U.S. went from, they were kind of, I know it's a joke that the U.S. is the world police, but they basically went from protecting the world to, after that, being at the forefront of everything to include counterterrorism, everything else. The U.S. is the leader in all that sort of stuff. Therefore, the whole rest of the world is far more dependent upon the U.S. military now than they were 20 years ago. And the same exact thing with currency. When we had the financial, even before then, we have had governments buying our debt for years, decades. That's the way they can't get off the US dollar, even if they want to, because they own so much US, US treasuries in the first place. They own a ton of it. It would be, not in their best interest to actually pull away from that and such. So you got to kind of have that backdrop there when you're kind of thinking through these things, that the US actually has their hooks deeper into people than we did just 20 years ago because of those things. Financial crisis. Guess what happened? The US didn't directly bail out other countries. However, we made moves that directly influenced and directly gave us more of a influence in that country's currency to help the entire world economy stay afloat and such. So all those sort of things have happened over the course of the 20 years that have actually made the dollar stronger, not in regards to the strength of the dollar versus other currencies, stronger in regards to it's going to be even harder for countries to get off the dollar in order to move to another currency and such. So let's kind of work through a few points here and such specifically about all this sort of stuff. We'll start right there with the China Saudi deal, and then kind of move forward from there. And obviously that deal right there kind of impacts, the petrodollar, right? Everybody knows that. Everybody's got to transact, most of the world has to transact oil and dollars. One of the ways that the U.S. keeps their strength out there in the economy, out there in the global economy and such. And, obviously there's a lot of wrangling about that. Hey, they're not going to use the dollar, whatever the case is. Even if the petrodollar goes away tomorrow, let's just say that standard just goes away. The whole world decides to go away from it. Impossible. But let's just say that they do. The first problem is that's only 25% of the total US dollars that are transacted. So it's this other 75% is still there. So it hurts, obviously, but it's not like all of a sudden the US currency collapses. You don't collapse because you lose 25% of your business, right? It's just not how it works. Hurts, yes, creates a lot of uncertainty, a lot of these weird anomalies that will pop up out of anywhere. Yeah, absolutely. Collapse of the dollar because of that? No. And this isn't just one deal with one country and another country. This is, the entire thing going away tomorrow. Still, 75% is there. So you can kind of see, man, you can make one deal like this a year and you're 3 decades away from just getting down to that 25, getting down to that 75% range. It's just, one of those deals, it seems big until you look at the actual data and you realize it's not actually that big. Now, remember, with the Saudis, there's also that military component with the U.S. that's there. It's not like China is all of a sudden going to step into that U.S. role of protecting the Saudis from the rest of their adversaries there in the Middle East and such. We were willing to go to war to protect that country and those assets in that part of the world. I'm not here to argue right or wrong about the wars or anything else like that. The point is the U.S. repeatedly has stepped up with military intervention to include war to protect those interests and such. I don't know, one, if you really look at it, China does not have the military industrial complex that the U.S. has. They may one day, I agree, but they don't have it right now. And more importantly, do they have that appetite to protect to that level in that country, in that area of the world? I don't know if they do or not. They most certainly couldn't do it right now. In the future, will they have that appetite? I don't know. So do I think the Saudis want to do anything more than saber rattle to get a little bit of a better deal, a little bit more, flexibility to Washington or whatever? Do they want that all to go away and be 100% reliant upon China to do that? I don't think so. At least not right now. That is definitely not the answer and such. And you have other factors there with China too in regards to they like to manipulate their own currency, one, which is known. I understand the U.S. manipulates it, but they manipulate it within the market, not just arbitrarily changing the price of things. China also does that with commodities as well, their own internal commodities as such. They control that market. They do not let the free market get out there and control those sorts of things. So there is, I won't call it hesitation with the Saudis, but I definitely think they would need a lot more convincing that China's not going to do that to their oil in a scenario to where they got rid of the U.S. altogether and such. So when you kind of work through just those factors for the Saudis, never mind the fact that the Saudi currency is pegged to the dollar. It's not, they're going to agree to sell oil in a different currency, but their actual currency is pegged to the US dollar, just like most of the rest of the world's currencies are. So you kind of see that scenario there to where it doesn't make any sense for the Saudis to do anything dramatic enough to really hurt the influence of the dollar long term, because they're just hurting themselves, not only from a military standpoint, but also just from the value of their currency standpoint. It would crush their economy to get off the dollar. That's the reality of the situation right there with the Saudis. Now let's kind of talk about China and honestly the rest of the world. And the US, for better or worse, has their hooks into everybody's currency. China owns more than $1 trillion worth of US treasuries, and those treasuries pay them a lot of interest. We can debate that all day long. It doesn't matter. The point is, China owns a lot of treasuries, and that is a huge hit to their economy if all of a sudden they decide they want to pull moves to where it hurts the US dollar, because they're being paid in US dollars. It doesn't make any sense. Same thing with all the rest of the European Union, Japan, you name any large country out there with a large economy, they all own tons and tons and tons of US debt, which means if you get off the US standard, number one, hopefully you got to get all those countries all to go with you at the same exact time, create something new, and everybody's got to be willing to go, hey, China, you guys better be willing to pay out, trillions of dollars in interest to us across the world. China can't do that right now. They're still dependent upon U.S., right? Think about how many imports come from the U.S. from China. You create a scenario to where the U.S. dollar, basically goes away or, becomes devalued or whatever the case is no longer the world reserve currency. Wow. I mean, what happens to China's economy? You're talking about a depression there. That's the facts as it is right now. That's why I think China, whenever we do eventually have a collapse in the US dollar, they may play a part in it. They may be one of the players, but I don't think they're going to be the main driver, the main deal maker, the big dog in the room, because they're too dependent upon us. That's the reason why I've never cared about any of the stupid delisting stuff, any of the military exercises that go on over there, or anything else like that. Both economies are so intertwined, it is virtually impossible to decouple them and to have a scenario where it doesn't hurt both countries immensely. Potentially losing their power, especially if it goes wrong. Like if they think all these countries are going to go for them and then they don't, and they choose to do what they did, or they choose to go to that extreme, at that stage, China's done as a country. So I don't see a scenario to where, the US has basically got everybody hooked on the dollar. Everybody uses the dollar. Everybody requires the dollar to be strong in order to fund their governments. How do you get off of that? How do you can't get multi-trillion-dollar assurances from any other country out there, along with the military power, along with everything else that comes along with that agreement with everything that happens. I'm not saying it can't get there in the future. I'm not saying it will stay that way forever. Right now, though, it is such a large lead and it continues to get larger that it's just one of those deals. It comes up. It's been coming up the whole time. And it was one of those things I started ignoring after a few years because I was like, this is just silly. Like once you understand how currencies work and once you kind of understand how the transactions work and how much debt they actually own. And I never hear anybody that's a bear on the US dollar or thinks it's going to collapse. I never hear anybody talk about the fact that why would a country legitimately get off the US dollar? Because they're getting paid to hold US dollars, essentially. Their economies have been saved by the US dollar, and it allows our Federal Reserve in a way, it's a roundabout way, it's not directly, to indirectly prop up other currencies that are in trouble. All those sorts of assurances are there. There's not a power broker out there, in government that wants to lose that. So that's kind of where I kind of stand on a lot of this sort of stuff, that those dynamics will eventually change. I agree, but I think we're looking at a multi-decade process, and what's going to be the winner and what's going to happen and what's going to be this and what's going to be that are probably all going to be gone, honestly, by the time that happens. Now, it doesn't mean there can't be a super event of some sort that flips the scale. Absolutely, there could be. But, if it's going to be this thing to where it's one domino, then a second domino, then a second domino, or third domino, and so on and so forth, that's going to take the course of decades to work its way all the way through based upon how the system is currently set up. You can't set up a system over, over 100 years now and expect you to just be able to unwind that system in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. It's just not how it works unless you have some sort of a catastrophic event of some sort, which means there's not a domino. You just have a catastrophic event that happens. So, unless we want to play doomsday all the time, which is what I choose not to do. Again, I've been hearing that since the 80s too, honestly. Looking at realistic and what's in front of us, it's not realistic at this stage because nobody stands to gain from somebody making a significant play right now. Doesn't mean it won't be in the future, but right now, China does not stand to gain at all. It cripples them if they decide to play hardball and try to, flip their currency, everybody's currency to, Chinese currency or whatever the case is, whatever deal they're trying to broker or anything else like that. It doesn't do anything but hurt them. So it doesn't make a lot of sense outside of saber rattling. Just keep in mind, this type noise with China comes up all the time. Remember, it was the US being the aggressor, right? First, we were going to put tariffs on all the Chinese goods. And then it was, just last year, a year before, we're going to delist all the Chinese companies and all this other stuff like that. And every time I just kind of chuckle and go, it doesn't matter. It's not going to happen. I'm sure we put tariffs on it. Guess what? That just means we paid a little more for the goods here in the US. It didn't affect anything in regards to outside of scoring political points. And that was basically it. That was the whole stance and the whole entire thing. There was, the US got what they wanted with the delisting talk. Now they're able to look inside the books, which the Chinese said, we're not going to let you guys come over here and look. You can't look. You can't look. We're not even going to let our countries look. And what do you know? They're letting us look now. So it's the same sort of political gamesmanship that kind of goes on between the two countries. And this is how they choose to do it. They use it with the military, flying exercises, doing all this other stuff. They make these little deals with countries that really upsets the other side. I mean, it's politics 101. When the reality is, I know we're both dependent upon each other. It doesn't mean it may not come to a head one day, but right now, nobody stands to win from eliminating China. US cannot get away from China. China cannot get away from the US. And until that dynamic is significantly shifts, which I don't know what would cause that shift, unless unless all of our goods start being made in India or something like that as the US, I don't see a scenario. And there's no way you're going to pull all the manufacturing out of China and into India. It's just not saying India can't be a player and start taking away business from China. But the Chinese manufacturing is so good, so efficient. They make quality now versus where they didn't used to and such. It's going to take India decades to get to that level. much less to be able to handle the capacity that would have to come from China in the first place to get there and really prop up India to where we could get completely off the China, manufacturing and such. I just don't see it happening. Again, we're talking things multi-decades out in regards to that sort of stuff happening. So when I hear these type talks and such, again, I've literally been hearing this for 20 plus years. Usually it's the gold guys or the guy selling you the alternative investments or, that sort of thing. And again, do your research. If you're hearing that or you're seeing a video on that, it seems like it's from a good guy, start sourcing it a little bit. Where do they get their information from? I've noticed either YouTubers either just see something on YouTube and they regurgitate a very similar video, or the guy you figure out he's more of a commodities guy, or he's a gold guy, he's a Bitcoin guy, or whatever the case is and such. And it's just kind of, you see the angle there. The gold guys have been pitching that for, decades. It just kind of is what it is and such. I'm not saying there isn't a case there, but in regards to it being something that's imminent or happening soon or anything else like that, it's just silly talk, guys. That's why I choose to ignore it. I'll get concerned if somebody like Japan or, the EU decides to move away from the US dollar. Something like that would be a significant shift and would definitely signal larger problems. Still would not cause the collapse of the US dollar. However, that would definitely be a domino to where I'd be like, okay, there's some problems there. Again, where else, where's the best place to put your money? Where's the best place to invest? It's the US stock market. It's US businesses. It's, the way our tax codes are, the way everything else is. We are the richest country in the world by far. It's not even close. All those sort of things lend itself to a lot of dominoes have to fall before we get to the collapse of the dollar and such. It's not this thing that you hear to where, hey, if you don't start buying gold right now, you'll regret it in 5 years. It's just silly talk. So again, if that changes, obviously I'll let you guys know. But for right now, this is just more saber routing, gamesmanship. Like I said, they're not getting what they want out of U.S. politicians, so they're going to do little games like this to poke the bear per se. And we do the same exact thing over there. It's just part of it. It's just kind of like the balloon thing and all the other ridiculous stuff that I don't know, guys. It's again, we live in a 24 hour news cycle as such too, which of course means people need content for 24 hours. It means everything gets amplified because everything has to be a crisis, right? Nothing can just be, hey, here's the news, here's what happened today. Everything has to be a crisis, and then they've got to give you the information and then take it to its worst conclusion or its best conclusion or both. It can't be what the reality is, which is usually somewhere in the middle. It's just not how media works nowadays. And it's just not how every piece of news is going to get exaggerated to that point. So you got to kind of work through that, parse through that a little bit and such. And in regards to this, it's just not that big of a thing there. And again, I've been hearing this for a long, long time. And there's a lot of things, a lot more complexity to it than just, hey, they're going to make this deal, then somebody else is going to jump on the deal. And then it's just this domino that just falls down into everybody just now all of a sudden uses Chinese yuan instead of the US dollar to trade in. It's a lot more complex than that. And it's not just about the pure trade of the items there. And of course, the sheer scale of a lot of these things and such. When we're talking about the deal with Brazil, Brazil one isn't tied to any currency. So they're not even part of the currency exchange program per se. They're not even part because they're not pegged to anything. They're called a floating currency. There you go. That was the word. I couldn't think of the word and such. So who freaking cares? It's a floating currency. I mean, that's the reason why it's not worth anything. That's the reason why the dollars aren't worth anything or anything else like that. It's just a dead currency at that stage. So cool. Make a deal with a dead currency. Awesome. It's 1/1000%, not 0.0000001% of the dollars traded, over the course of a year. It's irrelevant. So that's kind of some things right there that seem scary until you actually look at what the actual data is and such, and you realize, okay, that's exactly why China chose to do that, because it affects nothing. It has zero material, hit on the dollar. Again, they're punishing themselves by trying to do something like that with, let's say, Japan, where it would make a big difference there and it would be a big domino and such. It just doesn't do anything. So anyways, hopefully this all made sense. It was helpful and kind of cleared that up and such. If it didn't, definitely hit me up with other questions and such. I'm sure I missed some things. I'm sure I didn't explain some things thoroughly and such. It's a relatively complex topic, and without just getting into a lot of complexity, it's really, really hard to explain, but hopefully that kind of gave you a general overview as to, hey, until you kind of see some of these other sort of things and such, it's not in anybody's best interest to have the US dollar go away at this stage. Now, future, totally different. Agree. Nobody can see the future, but right now there's no domino creating a domino effect that we're going to see in the future or anything else like that. So, and if you want information like this, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times a week, plus get, live Q&As with me, take 5 courses for free, see all my buy and sell alerts, see my watch list with price targets, and a whole host of other stuff in there. I had the best Discord group. Heck, you can ask me anything, slide into my DMs. We do Q&As. You name it, we got it in there. We actually have more coming as well. Make sure you check out the pinned comment down there and see if a membership is right for you. And click this video here if you want to see the 3 stocks I'm interested in buying. And click here if you want to see my exact plan during this market. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.